Hello and welcome to the Raising Kellan podcast. My name is Marsh Naidoo and I blog at raisingkellan.org, where we curate resources for parents raising children with disabilities. On today's episode 128 is part 2 of the conversation with Todd and Kristen Evans, who have co-authored the book How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Children with Disabilities. Part 1 was the interview with Todd, and today is part 2 with Kristen. This episode is brought to you by Teddy Therapy Services, your online physical therapy provider. As always, remember the content provided on this podcast is for your information only. And if you seek advice for your specific situation, to contact a trained professional. So grab that cup of coffee, put your feet up, and get ready for some awesome conversation. Today I'm joined by Kristin Evans. So Kristen is Todd's wife, and we've spoke to him on last week's episode. Besides being a mom, Kristen is also a licensed master's social worker. Kristen, my initial question to you is going to be about the book and what motivated you all to put pen to paper.
So we were so discouraged and just could not figure out how to make our marriage work because we had such unique issues, and finally stumbled around learning those skills. And we realized we don't want other couples to have to stumble around like we did and try to figure out how to make it work, because couples don't have time to try and figure it out. So we thought, what if we write a book to help other couples learn these practical skills quickly and simply? And then I started researching. I read about 200 professional journal articles and studies. And we just kind of combined what we had learned, our story, our faith, and all this research to create something like a guide that couples can go to and learn these additional marriage skills.
You often talk about mental health and self-care. Now, this obviously applies to both mom and dad. Can you kind of elaborate and talk more to that, Kristen?
So parent caregivers and all caregivers of, parent, spouse are at increased risk from mental health and physical long-term conditions. We have actually double the risk for developing depression, anxiety, and a greater risk actually for developing post-traumatic stress disorder as well. And so a big part of being a healthy caregiver, being able to be the best parent to care for our children, is having a strong mental health. And we also go through a lot of grief. And one of the things that impacts the marriage most is a spouse's mental health. So you think about 1 in 3 of us have depression, anxiety, at least moderate. That is at least 1 in 3 marriages that's impacted by a mental health condition. So that is combining the mental health, faith, and marriage is addressing the whole person, addressing every area. They all interact together, physical health as well. And so we just want to give caregivers the practical ways to not be ashamed or feel like something's wrong with them, and just to say, hey, this is normal that you're going through this, and this is how you can address it.
So on the last episode, Todd and I talked about communication and having the discussion whether this was a feelings conversation or a solutions conversation to establish a mindset before you'll have the actual conversation. Obviously, there are so many gems within the book itself, but I love how you build the skill set for parents. And can you talk about how, you were just like identifying the problem and so forth, because often when someone or you receive advice, there might be one or two strategies in there, but there isn't a framework that you can then take and actually apply to that situation that may be unique to the couple. So talk a little bit about the framework you established within the book, Kristen.
It has taken us decades to refine this and do it well. So each spouse comes from a different need, potentially the same need, but most often women are looking for emotional validation. And a lot of times men are looking for, oh, here, I want to give you a solution. And that can create tension, hurt, and that definitely did in our marriage. And so we had a kind of an aha moment as we were writing the book, actually, that I usually come from, I've had a hard day, Bethany Grace is really sick, and I'm just looking for, I'm sorry you've had a hard day. That sounds, painful and you're stressed. Whereas he used to come at what I said with, okay, so what medicines can we give her? What can we do? Do we need to call the doctor? And I'm just sitting here like, I just told you. So I come from that. Typically, Todd comes from, if he says, oh, this is happening, and I, say, oh, I'm sorry, he's looking for a solution. And so what we have learned is, one, to respond the way we need to receive that feedback. Two, as parents of children with disabilities, it's especially important to have both. So we need to solve problems. We have hard, complex problems as caregivers, but we also have very different painful emotions and grief and stress. So what we've learned is to respond the way we think. Typically, each of us needs what we need to hear, but then we also say, do you want me to help you brainstorm for a solution? Like I would say that to Todd. After I say, oh, I'm sorry, that sounds complicated. Can I help you figure it out? Then I would say, that sounds really hard. And then he has learned to validate my emotions first, and then I've become willing to allow him to help me find a solution. So as parents who have children with additional needs, we actually need to have both those conversations and be willing to, one, respond to our spouse the way they need, but two, the person needs to be willing to say, okay, I'm open to having that other conversation.
Kristen, as far as, you really need to read the book, but as far as perhaps a healthy coping strategy, we talked about communication. Is there something in terms of a strategy that you would like to impart?
One of the biggest factors that affects the marriage is the level of chronic stress. And so in order to get to a point where we can even connect with one another, we have to reduce our stress levels and our body's chronic hypervigilance, always on guard and ready to act. And so one of the most important things we can do is lower our stress levels individually and together. And that might look like making sure you get out for a walk, or the other person gets out for a walk, de-stressing together. Mindfulness is a very effective tool. Just being in the present moment and being really present with one another. Mindfulness-based stress reduction exercises are very effective for caregivers, which is just being present in your body and relaxing your muscles. One of the things we do is deep breathing together, and a deep breathing hug. And even just 30 seconds to a minute of practicing these exercises, it's called micro mindfulness, can significantly make a difference.
I also wanted to touch on the point of grief and how that can be cyclical. And you so well describe that. In terms of grief is not necessarily one and done. It is something that pops or rears its head up during different moments in the marriage, or that you as a couple may experience together, or individually with your relationship with your child. Can you speak a little bit more about that, Kristin?
Yes, this was a significant concept. As we wrote the book and I researched, it helped heal our marriage so much while we wrote the book, because that was one of the biggest wedges that was coming between us in the early years. We thought we grieved the diagnosis, we're devastated, we grieve that together. Okay, now we move on and live our life. We didn't understand, and especially Todd, that it is a continual lifelong process for special needs parents. And even at the time, you grieve this initial diagnosis, then it's like waves hit you. And it's continual. But also, if there's a decline in condition or another new diagnosis, there's that huge wave again of acute grief. And Todd just couldn't understand why I couldn't get over my grief and move on. And he had moved on. Or so he, was compartmentalizing. And so the concept of we grieve differently, we can be in different states of grief, which is different from, the common stages of grief. And that can really cause some tension in the marriage. And so it's called chronic sorrow for special needs parents. And so just being aware that's going to hit at different time. There's triggers. Your spouse has a trigger, like the start of the school year for Beth for high school. That was really hard because she's more like a preschooler, but going to high school. That's hard, and Todd knows that. He knows those school year moments are hard. And then I know other triggers for him. And so just being willing to support one another, even if we don't understand what the other person is going through.
I know this year Kellan started middle school. It's just a whole different set of emotion. And I know part of that is moving into those teenage years. Mm-hmm. But that's stressful to me and Prakash because it upsets us seeing him upset. You often talk about the benefit of seeking help in terms of counseling. And I would just like to know more about that, Kristin.
Yeah, so there's many barriers to caregivers seeking counseling. Obviously, the financial, being able to get out of the house and go. Then there's the stigma, especially within the Christian community of, there's something wrong with me, I shouldn't go. So we just try to normalize. It makes sense that counseling would help you, even if you don't have depression, anxiety, just to process the grief and learn coping skills, to manage the stress in terms of couples counseling, learning these additional skills, which there's more and more couples counselors who are learning and getting training and helping families with disabilities. We just encourage, if at all possible, all special needs parents to go to some type of counseling. And now with the telehealth option, that has opened a door for parents who can't leave the house. Like I have a telehealth counseling session today, and that has just really opened the door. And and of course, find a a licensed, reputable therapist if you're going to do online mental health. But yes, we just try to lower that stigma. We even have a workbook that people can download for free that helps them work through, would counseling help me? Would it be a good fit for me? Resources for how to find a counselor and get financial assistance. And so that is just we are a big advocate for seeking mental health treatment.
As a parent raising a child with complex medical needs, we need to pull in a village, or we need to pull in supports so that we can stay afloat and keep our families afloat. Mm-hmm. We mentioned faith as being a foundation. Are there any other sources or resources that may help listeners?
Yes. So definitely church support groups. And there's not a whole lot of churches that have caregiver support groups. It's usually the larger ones. There are a couple ministries that have a small database of churches in different states and areas. And all these links are on our website, on our resource page. There's also really good online special needs support groups for moms, for dads, for couples. Rising Above Ministries is one ministry that comes to mind that has lots of excellent online support groups for those parents who just can't find one in their area or get out of the house to go. There's also other support groups like Parent to Parent and other ministries. And so there's a lot out there. And I didn't realize that until we started getting connected. I started researching and I was like, wow, there's actually really good, excellent groups. There's also Facebook groups. I dropped off social media when Beth was born and little. One, I didn't have time, and two, it was too painful. I just couldn't see my friends who had healthy babies and healthy kids and a normal life. It was just too painful. And that was, if I could go back, I would change that. And I tell people, stay on social media, stay in support groups online, because that has been a tremendous help to me. So even I have a Facebook group for moms on Disability Moms Living Strong. And I just encourage, faith and mental health and get connected, look in your area. If there's not something you can go to, try out one of these really good online groups. And actually research has shown being in an online support group for caregivers is just as effective as going in person.
There's, there's always such a fight for our time. There's like a million things to do on one day, mm-hmm. and you so effectively talk about how you can prioritize. Speak more to that, please, Kristen.
We have a long to-do list of everything we could do to help our kids. Get them into this therapy, go to therapy every week, get them into the specialist, do all these therapies at home. And I realized I'm never going to get through that whole list for everything I could do to help Bethany Grace. And so at some point a couple years ago, you just have to make the choice to say, I'm moving my health up to the top of the list. Because if we are healthy as caregivers, that is going to improve the development of our children, the health of our children, especially if our anxiety is lower. That actually helps lower problem behaviors and helps the child's development. So I just encourage parents, hey, move your health to the top of the list. Go to that doctor's appointment. Go to that counseling appointment. Take the time to eat a healthy snack. And if you can, get more sleep. And so we do have to make that choice to prioritize our own health. And that's hard to do because we feel guilty. But if you think about it in terms of, I'm doing this, one, for myself, but two, for my child. And, when my mental health was seriously severe, that impacted my children and my marriage. And once I got healthy, we began to thrive as a family. So just make it a priority. I encourage parents, and we shouldn't feel guilty.
Communication is key, and there's another part that you describe where you also regulate your emotions. And sometimes, we do get stuck in flight or fight. It's really hard to get out of that lower brain, and it's hard to de-stress. You mentioned mindfulness and the breathing exercises. Any other tips, Kristen, that comes to mind before we head into talking about the resources you guys offer?
So, a lot of times, especially as parents, we push down our emotions and we think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that way. I don't have time to feel that way or I'm going to fall apart. And that actually creates more stress. And so when we stop to actually acknowledge, hey, I'm feeling sad, and be curious, why am I feeling sad? Well, I'm sitting at my daughter's 8th grade graduation, watching her struggle to walk across the stage. And she's not going to those fun graduation parties. And once I'm able to say, it makes sense I feel this way, and be kind and compassionate to myself and allow myself to grieve if I need to or feel whatever, and accept, okay, I'm feeling this way in this moment, that one helps us feel compassion towards ourselves, but two, it lowers that intensity of the emotion. And when we talk to either a friend or pastor or spouse about, hey, I'm feeling this way, that actually lowers stress as well. So I think this is really hard for caregivers to do, but that can be very significant in lowering the intensity of the emotions, processing that grief, and having self-compassion and not feeling that guilt and shame.
As far as the resources on disability parenting are concerned, Kristen, what would you like listeners to know?
So we have just tried to create as many free resources. They're professional, research-backed, but also practical, because we know you don't have time. So print the one sheet of, these are 3 ways to connect to God throughout your day. You can also read the first chapter of the book free. Baker Books, Thank You has made that available. So just enter your email. We'll send you the first chapter and all these resources. We just lots and lots of links for everything from respite care links to support groups to mental health. We just want to connect people as much as possible. So follow us at Disability Parenting on Instagram, download those free resources, and send us a message. We would love to hear from listeners.
Any final words to leave listeners with, Kristen?
I just want to encourage all those who are listening to just take one step of taking 5 minutes to just sit and breathe, care for yourself, and just take that step to maybe look into counseling, and just be kind to yourself today and compassionate. You're going through a lot. It makes sense you're struggling. And I just want to say other parents are struggling too. We're all struggling. It's not just you.
Yes. You know what? That's a really real note to end this conversation with. I thank you for both your time and Todd's time today. And, I thank you for putting pen to paper and writing this fantastic resource. And that is How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Your Children with Disabilities. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Marsh.
As always, thank you for listening along on the podcast today. Be sure to check out Todd and Kristen's book, How to Build a Thriving Marriage as You Care for Children with Disabilities, as well as their online community, disabilityparenting.com. I would love for you to leave a rate and review of part 1 and part 2 of this episode on your podcast platform, and would appreciate you sharing the news of this awesome resource, which is helpful whether you are or are not raising a child with a disability. Wishing you a Merry Christmas, and as always, remember, get to the top of your mountain. This is Marsh Naidoo signing off.